Alright, so today's lecture is our sort of what is economics lecture. So it's a good place to start the semester actually understanding what it is that we're actually going to talk about this semester. So the learning objectives, again, remember all these tie together to the syllabus learning objectives, to the chapter highlights, the PowerPoint shows, the quizzes, and so on. These would be the first three. We won't get through all of these learning objectives today, but we'll get through 2.5 or so. So we're going to define economics and begin discussing some related terms like science, scarcity, and economic agent. We're going to explain the relationship between economics and the other social sciences, and then hopefully the ultimate goal of all of this, when we're all done, is we will be able to describe the rational self-interest model of human behavior, which is sort of the thing that sets economics apart from other disciplines. All right? But we're going to approach this first by sort of asking a question. And it's broad and a bit esoteric, I understand, but it's a good chance for you just to let your minds wander even more than you normally do during class, right? And that is, what do you want? So tell me, what is it that you want? Tell me what you want.
Money.
What you really, really want. All right. Now you'll be singing that for the rest of the afternoon. Gotta love the Spice Girls all the time. No, but seriously, so one of you shouted out money already, but yeah, let's just go with this. Let's just brainstorm a list of stuff that you want. It can be concrete or not or whatever. So money. What else?
Heat vision.
I'm sorry?
Heat vision.
Heat vision?
Heat vision.
Oh, heat vision. I was like, heat vision. That's pretty strange. Heat vision. That's cool. I like it. Something else.
X-ray vision.
Status, X-ray vision, that's actually a little more useful maybe, I think. I can think of uses. Something else. Did somebody want to fly? I'm sorry. Yeah, that is one of the coolest answers. I've been asking this question as students for more years than I'd want to tell you, but somebody surprised me one time with that answer, and it was just really cool, and he was like, I want to fly. And not fly in a plane, that's not what you mean, right? You mean just fly, I can jump in the air and fly. That would be so utterly cool, as far as I'm concerned. I agree.
The power to manipulate time.
The power to manipulate time.
No, that's a creepy.
That's a neat one to think about. We will come back to that later this semester and talk about the implications of time manipulation. I guarantee it. Cool. I'm sorry?
Oh,
it is. It's very much. Okay, so all of you, put this in your head and think of something that you want. Let's, for the moment, ignore the really esoteric things like happiness and peace and love and all those things. Money can buy something close to love. Close enough, quite honestly. But anyways, so just put aside the esoteric things for a minute and really concentrate and think about something that you want, okay? And by the way, I'm all about neuroscience and how the brain works and things like that, being a behavioral economist. So you should recognize that if you tell me your daydreams, things that you imagine like this, I can tell a lot about you and about how you think. For example, really vivid daydreams are a clear indicator of intelligence, right? So if I ask the question, what do you want, and somebody says a car, I'm like, okay, that's fine. If somebody says they want an azure blue Bentley GTC with the white interior and the chrome rims, I'm thinking you're way more intelligent than the guy who just said the car, because you have this really detailed image in your head, right? So think about your daydreams and what it says about you. Okay, so everyone has something in their head, yes? Okay, imagine for a minute that you look under your chair and you see a brown paper bag, a large brown paper bag under your chair that is not yours and you didn't notice when you sat down, but it's there, okay? And you surreptitiously peer into the bag during class while none of the rest of us are looking, and you notice that it's filled with money, $50 bills. And after class, when no one's paying any attention, you sort of look around and you gather up the bag with your belongings and you leave. Now let's ignore the sort of potential guilt factors or social question of whether this is right or wrong for the moment. But you gather up a paper bag full of money and you leave. And you go back to your car or your dorm or wherever you can be in private and you pull the money out and you count through the $50 bills in this large bag and there's $5 million in this bag. Actually, no, $5 million in 50s is like, it's a big bag, but it's not like, it's like a shopping bag. That's about how much space it takes up. I checked it out. So $5 million. Now, think back to the thing that you wanted. Can you get the thing you wanted? Some of you say yes, some of you say no. I mean, whoever said money, I mean, you literally got what you wanted, right? $5 million in cash, there you go. Most of you are shaking your head yes, that whatever it was that you wanted, you could. Okay, so like my Bentley, yeah, I can buy one for every day of the week, actually, even at $350,000 a piece, you know, and I'll still have some money left over. Is there anything you want now? So you got the thing you really wanted. Is there anything you want now? Yeah. Because, again, even sticking to tangibles, right, $5 million, well, it's a lot of money, is not like I'm now independently wealthy type money. I mean, if I invest $5 million in reasonably safe investments, I could live a decidedly middle-class life off the interest. Okay, but I would still be seriously thinking about what I'm spending and not touching the capital and things like that. So $5 million is a lot, but it's not enough to make you utterly never have a financial concern again in your life. Forget 5 million. What if you were one of the richest people in the world? What if you're Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or the Sultan of Brunei, or pick your favorite wealthy person? You know, like Bill Gates. Well, Warren Buffett's a better example. His wealth is more real because it's not all mostly in the stock of one company. But you know, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are in the tens of billions of dollars. That's a level of wealth where there's not anything financial that you could not buy and really never even notice, right? Like Bill's walking down the street there in Everett, Washington, past the Boeing factory, and sees a shiny new 747 like rolling off the assembly line. He wouldn't want the 787 because they've been grounded. He might as well get the 747, right? He could probably pull out his wallet. Like if he had the same percentage of his wealth in his wallet as I do, he could probably pull out his wallet and nearly pay for it, right? That's another interesting daydream, by the way. Like, imagine, because I'm guessing that none of us are in that like multi-billion-dollar range right now. Imagine what that will be like when you all graduate from Cal and get those jobs that you end up being billionaires. Imagine what it will be like to never wonder about, like, you know, even big purchases like houses and yachts. Paul Allen has a yacht that is like bigger than some cruise ships. The other Microsoft founder. Actually, it's 2 of them. He has 2 of the world's 50 largest yachts. You can find them on the internet, actually. Over my long Christmas break, but nothing else to do, I actually was exploring. You can actually find out where in the world they are at any given time. I've forgotten the website, but I've been bookmarked. Don't know why, but it was interesting. So daydream about that sometime, not in class, but some other. But the question is, back to what do you want? If you're that wealthy, do you still want things? I mean, does Warren Buffett want something? Does Bill Gates want something?
Would you be bored after a while?
He may well be bored, right? And that's actually, I mean, you know, a characteristic of monetary and other addictions, right? I mean, that like whatever it is, you need further like stimulation to continue to get something out of it. Yeah, that's good.
I don't know, you probably want lunch or something like that.
Yeah, he might, or you know, Bill Gates wanted the Justice Department off his back a few years ago, right? I mean, and his money couldn't quite buy that. So yeah.
Actually, Bill Gates was on the Today Show this morning.
I know, I saw it.
Yeah, he gave an interview, and I know he spent a lot of stuff. What he wants is to, I guess last year was the first year India went polio-free in the history of India. So I mean, the ones may not be of financial value, so on and so forth, but he still has goals he's setting for himself in no way. So I don't think he's bored, he finds new interest.
Absolutely, and there are things that are beyond him and his personal desires that now he wants for others or for the world, and we'll talk a little bit about like why that is, like, you know, how is that his own interest or not, and things like that in a bit. But the point is, yeah, like even those who have literally nearly unlimited financial wealth would still want things. right? And we don't have to limit ourselves in this way to like people. We could keep thinking about institutions with lots of financial or other resources and whether they still want things. You know, if we think private institutions like the Roman Catholic Church has the largest sort of stock of wealth, although it's in weird things that are like sort of unliquidatable, like the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So that's kind of a hard one to go with. But forget about privates. Like, let's go with the United States government. Okay, the United States government commands a $13 to $15 trillion economy, right? And even in bad years like recently, collects nearly $2 trillion in taxes. $2 trillion in revenue makes Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's wealth look like a drop in the bucket. And yet, does the government want things? Can we have everything we want? Absolutely not. Take a look at Congress, right? Political things aside, even in moderate times when people tried to work together, we could never have everything we wanted, right? We have so much we want to spend on defense and education and infrastructure and all sorts of social programs and so on and so on and so forth. And even with $2 trillion, even with $3 or $4 or $5 trillion, we could never have everything everyone wants. Why exactly are we talking about this? It comes down to what you have to do when you can't have everything you want. When you can't have everything you want, what do you have to do? Make decisions. Exactly. I have to take what I do have, the resources I do have, be it what you have right now, or the $5 million you found under your chair, or the $10 billion that Warren Buffett has, or the $2 trillion that the United States government has, and you have to choose. You have to decide and prioritize. These are the things we'll use our limited resources for as opposed to the things that we will not use. And we're talking about this because this is what economics is about. Formal definition of economics is on the slide. Economics is the science that attempts to study how economic agents make choices when faced with scarcity. Economics is the science that attempts to study how economic agents make choices when faced with scarcity. You will notice in the definition that there are 3 words that are italicized, or phrases that are italicized: science, economic agent, and scarcity. I've done that because I want to spend time, the rest of today's class, and probably a bit of our lecture on Monday. Friday, remember, we'll have a team-based learning day, so we won't be lecturing that day. I want to spend the rest of this time and some of Monday actually discussing a bit further what exactly these terms mean, what science means, what economic agent means, and what scarcity means. All right? Science. So our questions related to science would be just what is science? And is economics a science? I've claimed it is in the definition, but is in fact economics a science? I hope this works because I've got to test it. Okay, this will actually sound. That's wrong. Okay, so Norbit, if you've not seen the movie, I can't really highly recommend it. It's silly, but it's not bad. But they talk about science, and that's why we're going to listen to this in a second.
Damn it, Norbit, how many times I got to tell you when you drive my car, don't adjust my seat?
I haven't touched your seat.
Then why is it up so damn far?
It looks like it's back as far as it goes, Respucia.
Don't you move that I can tell, because look, when I have my 10 minutes going on, listen. You see that? That ain't right.
I hear it.
That scientifically proved that you was adjusting my seat.
That's not science.
It is, and just let it go.
It's not
I
science.
said let it go.
I'm just taking
I
it.
said it was
Don't you wish a Lord was freaks like me?
So Respucia has a problem that she claims she can solve with science, right? She gets in her car, and when she breathes, a certain part of her anatomy honks the horn, right? This scientifically proves that Norbit was adjusting her seat. The question is, what is the science? And is Respucia actually using science to prove that, in fact, Norbit has adjusted her seat? What is science?
You can use the scientific method to draw conclusions.
Excellent. Anything that uses the scientific method to draw conclusions. Who remembers the scientific method from third grade science class? Yeah, kind of. You've heard the word before, right? Like, yeah, something stuck from third grade. Give me some ideas. What is the scientific method?
Chem major.
That helps.
Using observations like hypotheses, which are then tested, and to either prove or disprove a hypothesis.
That's a pretty good synopsis of what it is. And generally it's funny because science majors and education majors know what the scientific method is. Whenever I teach them, like the elementary education students all know what the scientific method is because they've taken teaching science in the elementary grades, and this is what they learn about, and science majors know this. So yeah, scientists use the scientific method to attain new knowledge. Basically, there's a few different ways you can state it, but the usual idea is that there's an observation, and I apologize, the blue with the lights on is not showing up all that well, but that says observation. In other words, you observe something about the world, either about the physical world, about behavior, whatever it happens to be. You create a hypothesis that tries to explain the observation. So why is what I observe true? This is a possible reason why what I observe is true. You use the hypothesis then to create a prediction that is testable. If my hypothesis is true, if I do this, this will happen, right? So you create a prediction based upon a hypothesis that can be tested. You then test that prediction to see if it actually happens, right? And you evaluate the test. Does, in fact, the prediction hold true when I try to empirically test it or not? If it does, then we start to believe the hypothesis. If it doesn't, then we need to reformulate our hypothesis and do the process again. So that's the scientific method. By the way, let's think about Respucia for a minute. Is Respucia using the scientific method to determine whether or not Norbit has adjusted her seat? She certainly has parts of it. Now let's see if she has all of it, right? Because she definitely has an observation, right? She gets in the car and observes that when she inhales, her titties honk the horn, right? She has a hypothesis that this means that Norbit adjusted the seat. Her prediction is kind of odd though, right? Because the only prediction she has is to like repeat the observation, right? I just keep doing it over and over and over again. And that's, I think, where her whole like scientific method sort of fails, right? You can't have just, well, I keep observing it over and over and over again without doing something. If she could then adjust the seat and not honk the horn, then I could start to believe that it's the position of the seat that's causing the issue, as opposed to simply her observation over and over and over. So I actually think she kind of fails in the scientific method. She's doing what's kind of pseudoscientific. She's observing something and hypothesizing a reason, but then jumping to a conclusion because of the observation and hypothesis. That's what we usually call pseudoscience. Now, in your teams on Friday, I'm actually going to ask you to think more about this conceptualization of like what is science and what is not science, because there are lots of disciplines out there that are not sciences, that are academic disciplines, right? And I'm sure we can all name some, like English, for example, is not a scientific discipline. I don't think literature, but there are certainly people who make observations about literature and draw conclusions, right? There are published papers in academia about, say, literature, or about history, or about whatever it happens to be, art, okay? And these things are not necessarily scientific. So I want you to think in your teams, one of the questions I'll ask you to think about in your teams is what distinguishes scientific knowledge creation using the scientific method from non-scientific knowledge creation. Right? What happens in literature or art as opposed to one of the sciences. Right? There are two types of sciences. We classify sciences as either hard or soft. The hard ones, they're hard not because they're difficult, but they're hard because they study hard things. They study the physical world, okay, things that are observable, touchable, tasteable, smellable, and so on. So they study the physical world. Physics and chemistry, for example, are hard sciences. And there are soft sciences, sometimes also referred to as the social or behavioral sciences, which study human behavior. Okay? They're the ones that study human behavior. Why people do what they do. Economics and psychology, sociology and anthropology, political science, and so on and so forth are the soft sciences. They have in common, though, the fact that they all address new knowledge through the scientific method. Both in the hard sciences and soft sciences, you make observations about the world. be it the physical world or be it about behavior, you hypothesize an explanation, you create a prediction based on the hypothesis, you test the prediction, and then evaluate the hypothesis based on the test. Okay? So all of the sciences have those things in common. By this definition, then, we would answer our question about economics in the affirmative, that in fact economics is a science, it is a social science, because economists, when analyzing the choices that people make, do utilize the scientific method. We observe the behavior of individuals, we observe the choices people make. We hypothesize an explanation for the choices that people make. We have theories that we base hypotheses upon. We can then conduct empirical tests of our predictions. Be they laboratory tests, like behavioral economists like myself do laboratory experiments with people and animals, putting them in controlled decision-making environments and asking them to make choices and observing what they do, or like real-world statistical analysis where we use high-powered statistical technique as controls as opposed to laboratory controls. But again, we undertake controlled experimental tests or empirical tests of our predictions and analyze the results. So just like psychology or political science, anthropology, sociology, economics is in fact a science, a social science or behavioral science. Good, makes sense. Okay. Our next phrase, this sort of funny word, economic agent, right? Like I'm thinking like 007 now, right? Like I should put that music in the slideshow, right? When we get to economic agent. What exactly do I mean by an economic agent? I've been saying we observe people's behavior. I keep using the word people and saying this is about human behavior. So why don't I just say people? There's a good reason for that. The economists have a very particular meaning when we think about the types of decision-making situations and the framework within which decisions are made. That's where the economic agent thing comes into play. So let's think about this for a minute. The real question, and this is where the economic agent thing comes down to, is what exactly distinguishes the different social sciences? We just named the 4 major social sciences, and then there are a bunch of others. So the 4 major social sciences are economics, psychology, sociology, and political science. Excuse me, there are a lot of minor ones, which are minor in that they may sort of run or sort of split the border between sciences and non-sciences. So anthropology, for example, has aspects of the social sciences, aspects of the hard sciences, and aspects of the non-sciences in the discipline. History has aspects of the social sciences and aspects of non-sciences in the discipline. There are also a lot of applied social sciences. Criminal justice, for example, is an applied social science. Marketing and management are applied social sciences. Right? But what distinguishes these social sciences? Like, how is economics and psychology and sociology and political science, how are they different from one another? That wasn't rhetorical. Okay, good. That's a really common distinction that people try to draw, right? Like what part? And if I'm putting words in your mouth, please stop me. But I think what you're guessing is that maybe they study different types of decisions or types of behavior. So economists might be interested in, for example, market behavior, like what I decide to buy, while a sociologist might be interested in I don't know, sort of peer pressure things or something like this, whereas psychologists are interested in mental problems a lot of times, right, or effects of mental decision making. Political scientists are obviously interested in politics, right? So one possible explanation is that they study different aspects of behavior, right, different parts of or types of behavior. However, I would argue that while there may be typical things that each of them study, they're not really quite in those boxes as neatly as you might think. Let's think about, let's say urban social problems, right? So center cities, white flight to the suburbs, concentrations of poor in the cities, something that's very typically American, yes. Are there economists who are interested in questions related to this? Absolutely. I mean, we're very interested in what happens, say, politically when the tax base shrinks and you have an increasing demand for services and a decreasing ability to pay for those services, and why in fact people leave the city and move to the suburbs, why in fact the poor end up left in the city, why are all these things going on, why are these decisions made? That's a very typically urban economic type question. There are lots of urban economists who are interested in that problem. Are there sociologists who are interested in these exact same problems? Absolutely. There are sociologists who are interested in like the culture of like, you know, say poor black urban youth and how that impacts like the distribution of populations in metropolitan areas and why that's so different in Europe as it is in the United States, and so on and so forth. There are psychologists who are interested in these questions. Absolutely, because you know we have a whole range of psychological issues that are related to the exact same problems. Are there political scientists who are interested in these? Yes. Are there anthropologists who are interested in these problems? Yes. So here's a set of problems that I can name every single social science and they care about. I mentioned already I'm a behavioral economist. I study like individual behavior in the lab. There are behavioral psychologists, there are behavioral sociologists, and we all study these same sorts of decision-making situations. Yeah? So while typically, yes, we associate economics with like business decisions, for example, and political science with politics, that's not always what we see. Excuse me. All right, so the point is, like, whatever the field, we can find different social scientists in different areas who are studying it. So if that's not it, if it's not that there are different things that they're interested in within human behavior, what is the distinction? What's different about psychology from sociology, for example? Because I'm picking those two because a lot of you have probably taken psychology or sociology. I know almost all of you have probably taken psychology because you're part of the business students, but a lot of you may have taken sociology as well. So what is different between psychology and sociology? An idea?
I'd say psychology is mostly like how one person mind functions, and sociology is more like how society functions.
Good, really, really close to it. You're right on with psychology. Like the distinguishing characteristic of psychology, and this like really is what Freud did for psychology. I mean, there's a lot of variance within psychology in terms of beliefs, but one thing that Freud started that is consistent across psychology is the belief that the subconscious mind, what's inside here, is what drives human behavior. People do what they do because of what goes on inside their own subconscious, right? Freud put it in that id, ego, superego sort of breakdown, but they're the Jungians and so on and so forth, and they all have slightly different ideas, but that's the key. So in psychology, we have this subconscious action, that's what drives behavior. Sociology, you're kind of right, but you're still sort of on that line of it's what they study, right? That it's society. It's not so much in sociology that they study society. Has somebody taken Soc and remember, like, why do people do what they do according to a sociologist? It's kind of in the name.
Like what they see around them?
Yeah, in sociology there is a very external driving force, right? The social forces outside that cause me to do what I do. And I pick psych and soc because they are really so counter-opposite to one another. I mean, other than social psychology, which kind of like tries to mix the two together, there's a really, really, really counter-opposite belief about human behavior from the two. In psychology, it's what happens inside my head. I mean, yeah, what happens inside my head may be influenced by what's outside, but fundamentally it's whatever goes on in here is what makes me do what I do to the outside world. Whereas sociologists fundamentally have this belief that it's all that stuff around me that pulls me in particular directions, right? And those are counter-opposite views of what drives human behavior. And again, this is people do what they do. Everything, right? Whether it's like, a simple decision like in the morning to get out of bed, or it's a decision of what to purchase, or if it's, a decision to commit mass murder or something like that. Sociologists, psychologists have these differing views of where those decisions come from. What about economists? Economists have their own view, their own worldview of what drives human behavior, and that's what sets us apart from the other social scientists. Specifically, economists believe that all behavior derives from rational self-interest. All behavior is the result of rational self-interest. Now, in order to make sure we're good, what we want to do is actually think about what this term means. What is rational self-interest? And we can sort of take the terms one at a time and then put them back together and figure out what I mean by saying that all behavior is the result of rational self-interest. So, what's rational? I know you've heard the word before. We use its antonym more often, I think, in day-to-day speech in the 21st century. I think we say things are irrational more than they're rational. But
Making a calculated decision.
yeah, it's a calculated choice, right? It's well thought out. Rationality means that you consider options and you think through the decision. Right? If you tell your friend that, well, whatever they did was irrational, you mean that it was like done willy-nilly, you didn't give it any thought, and so on and so forth. So rationality implies that it's calculated, that it's well thought out. Good. What's a self-interest mean?
How's it going to benefit me?
Exactly. How it will affect me, the decision maker, right? So I think through everything, and I do the calculation, and I pick what's best for me, the decision maker. That's what rational self-interest is, then. I consider the options, carefully consider the options, and choose what's best for me. Carefully consider the options, choose what's best for me. Rational self-interest. Now, before we move on too much, I want to think about this conceptualization a little bit, because if we had a few psychologists or sociologists or less political scientists, but some other social scientists in the room, and they heard me just say that every single decision that a human being ever makes is rationally self-interested, some people might start taking exception. Maybe some of you are taking exception to my statement that every single decision is rationally self-interested. So let's think about some examples, and you can tell me whether or not they are rationally self-interested. Actually, let's start with the self-interest thing. Can you give me an example of something that appears to be not self-interested? Yes?
Charitable donations.
Charitable donations, good. Classic example of something that is not self-interested. By the way, GRE word for you, altruistic. That is the opposite of self-interest. Altruism is to think only about others as opposed to about yourself. So something that is altruistic is not about yourself, but about someone else. So charitable donations. We see lots of people giving money to charity, right? In churches every week, people give money to beggars on the street, and we give lots of money to all sorts of charities, and time and goods too, not just money, right? Why do we do it?
Tax cuts.
Tax write-offs. Why else?
Makes you feel good about yourself.
Makes me feel good about myself. If it makes me feel good about myself, it is not kind of self-interested. It is absolutely self-interested, right? How many of you give money or time or goods to charities whose mission you don't believe in? Sometimes.
People in the corner, you don't know if they're lying or not. So you may give them food, then they throw it there.
That's a very good point, right? Because you may have one idea in your mind, but it doesn't actually help them. But that's more on them, actually, right? Because you still gave them the food because you thought this was something that would help them, and you wanted to help them, right? They may have wanted money so they could go buy like a bottle of wild turkey or something, and you gave them this instead, but the burger wasn't the same, right? But that's okay. It was still you were trying to help them, and that's what you wanted to do. It didn't really help them. That's not your fault. Sure. So we don't give money to charities we don't believe in. Of course not. We give money to charities because we recognize that through collective action of the charity, I hope that more can be done to pursue the goals that I care about than through my own personal action, right? So maybe instead of giving the hamburger to the guy on the street, I give money to a food pantry that helps homeless people, right? Because maybe through that collective action, we can help those who actually want the food as opposed to those who want the money just to go and buy it.
Quick funny story. I used to work at Sheets up in town.
Yes.
And basically, a guy came in and got free food. We felt bad to give him food. Then we looked out the window. He was actually trying to sell it to get money. And he came back in and got the food.
He's self-interested too, then.
Right.
He's self-interested too. Very good. Cool. All right. So charitable donations, classic example of something that appears altruistic, but I would argue for lots of reasons, and we can go down some more too, is probably not altruistic. In your team exercise, this is another question I asked you to think about. Think of any other situations that may appear self-interested, right, but in fact aren't, and explain why. I would argue with you that you can't find situations that are not given other.
What about being an organ donor?
Good. Why would you be an organ donor?
It's a good thing to do.
Because you think it's a good thing to do. If you think it's a good thing to do, then...
But it's not really benefiting yourself. I'm not saying it's making me being a better person by being an organ donor.
Yeah, you're dead technically.
Yeah.
Right, so one, you're dead, so it's not like hurting you any at that point, right? Unless you have like beliefs about what happens to like, you know, your organs after you die or something like that. But my argument would be that while you're alive, knowing that you have that organ donor thing on your driver's license makes you feel good about what you've done. Or else you wouldn't do it, I would argue. I mean, I don't know.
I was going to say, to the counterpoint to that, I mean, you still leave a legacy behind in which you were an argument.
Yeah,
you have a legacy, hero syndrome, all those things. I mean, you have
yeah, it's another good reason why. And by the charitable donation, by the way, I mean, one of the big ones that none of you mentioned, I mean, so you actually want to help people, you get a tax donation. The other one is to look good, right? Coming back to, you reminded me, since you were the one who were talking about Bill Gates and you know, the polio thing, you know, Bill Gates was heavily criticized a few years ago for his lack of philanthropy. Right? And since then, there's been this outpouring of philanthropy from the Gates family foundations. You know, and this cannot possibly be not related to the fact that you need better press when you're that wealthy. And you know, if you look at churches, for example, a lot of economists have studied the donation activity in churches, for example. A simple thing, if you start collecting donations in churches electronically rather than by passing a plate during services, donations plummet, because there is both a peer pressure piece of like putting something in when the plate comes past, and also this is a big public display of like what I'm doing, so people like go with that. You know, why do hospitals have that big tree like right with every donor's name on it? Because and you know, places have the walks with like the names on the bricks. Why? Because people like actually want that recognition, right? And they're willing to give more because of recognition. Yes.
I don't think everybody seeks glory, for themselves. Sometimes you need to do that in the heart.
I absolutely think you're right, and that's not what everyone's looking for. But if you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, it's because you have this internal like desire to help other people, and the internal desire to be altruistic is actually self-interested, right? By our definition, self-interest means doing what you want, what benefits you. So if my beliefs are I should help my fellow man no matter what, and I do it, then I'm doing it because that's what my beliefs are. Right? And that's not a bad thing. I mean, there's a big difference between, and this is like, you know, people who argue against the self-interest model of behavior, there's a big difference between selfish and self-interest, right? Selfish implies doing things for oneself at the expense of other people, right? I mean, selfish behavior is self-interested possibly. It might actually not be in some situations, but selfish behavior is probably self-interested. But not all self-interested behavior is selfish behavior, right? Make sense? Okay, good. Other questions? Excellent. So the other piece is rationality. A lot of non-economists or people who don't understand the economist model criticize that rationality piece. Because what we said is that, like, you know, you consider everything, right? And then you choose what's best. Now, you don't have to raise your hands and admit this, but who's ever made a mistake? Who's ever made a choice that wasn't best? As I just said, you always pick what's best, right? Pick what's best for yourself. Well, I think all of us have at some point in our lives made a decision that was like, oh, not the best. Like maybe taking principles of economics with, or microeconomics with Dr. Hetler was not such a good choice, right? And you've realized this now. You still have 2 days to drop. So maybe you've realized that this isn't such a good choice. The point is, be careful to recognize what we're assuming. Economists are not assuming that people are omniscient or omnipotent, right? We don't assume that people are all-knowing. The rationality piece was, given what you have, we consider all available information and choose what's best. That doesn't mean that in hindsight, right, after the fact, a new piece of information may become available, or there was uncertainty in the decision-making process. Nearly every decision that we make during our lives has some uncertainty associated with it, right? There's some piece of information that we will not know until after the fact. So rationality does not mean that I never make a mistake. It simply means I never intentionally choose something that is suboptimal, right? I never knowingly pick the second best option. I always pick what I think is the first best option when I make the choice. If after the fact it turned out not to be the best option, oh well, that's not violating the concept of rationality. It simply means more information became available and what you had chosen was not so good. Let me give you an example, by the way, that I think draws this really, really home, and then we'll be done today. Let's imagine we go out to dinner. And you sit down in the restaurant, they offer you some lovely choices, you know, a steak dish with like a oh, I don't know, maybe like some cheesy potatoes and asparagus on the side and a really nice like horseradish sauce. Or they offer you a flounder stuffed with crab meat and lobster with a wonderful like arugula salad. Or they give you, I haven't eaten lunch, or let's see, a chicken, maybe like chicken piccata with lots of capers and mushrooms and a nice lemony sauce. Good? Okay, they give you these choices. You pick the fish, and you become you get food poisoning. Was the decision rational? Yeah, because you didn't know, right? You picked what you thought would give you the most happiness, satisfaction. Turned out it wasn't such a good choice. Let's change the scenario a little bit. You order the fish, and the server bends down and says, "Sir, madam, whatever it happens to be, when I got here today, the fish was left on the loading dock in the hot sun. I'd choose something else." And you say, "No, I have the fish." And you get food poisoning. Is that irrational? Most of you are saying yes, but a few of you are doubtful. Why is that not irrational?
You look at the facts and that leads you to conclude that thing is going to give you food poisoning.
Okay, because I mean I have this piece of information that I think now it's more like.
Either that, or you could be thinking that they might do the same to get a better tip, but it's more expensive for the steak. You never know.
That could be true too. The point I'm trying to make is actually, as an economist, and for you as budding economists, I would not be so fast to immediately assume that someone's choice that from the outside, when we're looking down on it, appears to be irrational is irrational. Because remember what we're assuming. We're assuming that this person is intentionally choosing something that is suboptimal. Could there be some other reason why they would want to choose the fish, even given this? Forget that. Like, I'm going to say, I'm going to have the steak, and I hear the server tell the person next to me that the fish is bad, and I say, "Excuse me, I'll change off the fish." What about that? Is there, I mean, as an economist, I don't want to assume that this person is irrational, because that means I have to throw them out of the human race, basically, right? Because they don't behave like all the rest of us. Is there some other possible explanation? Let me give you a couple. You have a huge exam tomorrow. If I have a hospital excuse because I was in the hospital barfing up with food poisoning, I won't have to take my exam and I can study for a couple more days. Maybe it becomes rational. Maybe I'm risk-loving. You know, there's those people who eat that fish with a spine, what is it, lionfish or something like that, that if it's not prepared just right, it'll kill you, right? There are people who choose to eat this. There are people who bungee jump and do all sorts of crazy extreme sports, right? I'm not saying that's not rational behavior. It may be that you get happiness or satisfaction out of taking risks. That's another possible explanation. It could be that you doubt the server's truthfulness. There's 100 other possible explanations we could come up with here. So I would not jump immediately to the idea that this person violates everything we think we believe about human behavior to assume instead, you know, they're just crazy. Yeah.
Based on everything you said, wouldn't that make even suicide itself to be irrational and in no way rational whatsoever, since the individual is unaware of any outcome or has no hindsight or 20/20 of their actions?
If the person is using what they believe at the time, like if I have come to the conclusion that the net present value of continued life is negative, suicide is a rational choice. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll come back to it.
Okay. So to end then, this is what an economic agent is. Economic agents are those who make decisions out of rational self-interest. Okay. So human beings do, business firms do, governments do. Lots of entities actually make choices out of rational self-interest. They weigh the options, choose what's best given available information. That's really what economics is about. It's about saying these types of choices. Choices made by rationally self-interested economic agents. Good deal? Okay, excellent. See y'all on Friday.